I don't fish with micro-barbed hooks anymore, but I did fish with them for over 20 years. I'd only ever switched to barbless when I had to because of the lake rules where I was fishing. But 3 years ago, I took a massive leap of faith. I decided to switch to barbless exclusively, no matter where I was fishing. Now I know that some anglers are going to say that micro-barbed hooks are better because they don't move around during the fight, and that they cause less mouth damage. They're also probably going to say that barbless hooks cause more hook pulls. I get it, it's a controversial topic, but there's one thing that's really convinced me, and I'm going to get to that. But first, is there actually any evidence out there that can help us make an informed decision on this subject? Well, it turns out that there is. There was actually a study conducted by Plumpton Fishery Management College. This was a professionally run study conducted over a period of 7 years. And what they found is that in 99% of cases, carp hooked with a barbless hook suffered less mechanical damage than a carp hooked with a micro-barbed hook. They couldn't find any evidence that barbless hooks slipped and caused additional damage during the fight. So an interesting finding on Plumpton's college work on hook holds, and that's the application of products like propolis, Medicarp really do make a difference. The hook hold was so clean, to be honest, I couldn't even see where it was. So how did I get on with barbless hooks in my own fishing? I caught exactly the same number of carp that I would have expected to catch given the conditions. I didn't have any more hook pulls than I would have expected. My hook to land ratio is about 98%. That means for every 100 carp I might lose 2. Well, he covered some ground. For me, hook pulls have got nothing to do with micro-barbed or barbless. It's got everything to do with hook sharpness. And if your hooks are not very sharp, they may slip and cause a hook pull. If you're the sort of angler that is used to recasting every 2 or 3 hours, repositioning rods, or catching a carp and just reusing the same hook time and time again, then I guarantee that every time you either recast or catch one, that hook point is not as sharp as it was when it first came out of the packet. Every time you are increasing the risk of a hook pull. I know in my own fishing that as long as I'm fishing with an absolutely razor sharp hook, and as long as I'm looking after that point every reset, every cast, then it doesn't matter whether I'm using a barbless or a micro-barbed. I'm going to land that carp 98 times out of 100. I also noticed that mouth damage was reduced to such a level that when I inspected the mouth after I'd unhooked the fish, I couldn't even see where the hook hold was. Absolutely mint. Can't see the hook hold on the barbless. It's a known fish, an original fish. Comes out a couple of times a year, I expect. What I did notice is that the hook point was always buried right up to the bend, because there's no micro-barb to get in the way. There's no increase in wire gauge to overcome to stop that hook going right up to the bend. Once a barbless hook has gone up to the bend, there is no way that it can move around or slip. It just does not go anywhere. It locks itself into position. I found that playing carp on barbless hooks is not an issue either. Obviously you've still got to pay attention to keep a steady pressure on the hook hold at all times. It's no good leaving the rod to go slack, because any slack is going to allow that hook potentially to drop out. But after a few sessions I got very confident with playing carp on the barbless, and I ended up playing them in exactly the same way that I would do when I used to fish micro-barbed hooks.
So what's happening, honey?
Third take in 10 minutes. And the conditions are bang on, but this is lunatic fishing. This is. I only had one rod left in the water, and he's just it's a sail away bite, isn't it? Now I've got to stop him before he takes me around the back of the island here. Up to him about 90 yards range, and he's pretty much kited on a tight line, and if I don't make some ground on him, he's going to have me around the back of the island. That's what they always do. Bearing in mind that the point of the island and the spot that I've hooked him from is a good 100 yards apart. That's all right, I've made the distance now. I can see the line entering the water, so dial down the panic a bit. Wow, look at that, the scales on that. What a stunner. Absolutely magnificent creatures. So clean. Tiny little pinprick there. Surely a carp is going to find it easier to spit out a rig made with a barbless hook. Now, can carp spit rigs? Absolutely. You know, we see it all the time in our fishing, especially with anglers that are using traditional semi-fixed rigs. But for me, whether a carp is going to spit the rig or not has got much less to do with barbless or micro-barbed. It's got everything to do with the type of lead system that you're using. If you're using lead clips or any form of semi-fixed rig, then the carp are going to use that weight of the lead against you and throw your rig more often than not. And you might not even know that it's happened. You won't even get a beep. You've been done. If you use a running rig, that can't happen, because the more a carp shakes its head, the further away the lead is sliding away from him. So he's got no purchase. He cannot use the weight of the lead against you. Now, I know for some of you that the idea of using a lightweight running rig in combination with a barbless hook might seem like utter madness, but it's actually the most effective way that I've ever found of catching carp. So here's the thing that has convinced me to make the switch to barbless 100% of the time. I've always believed that carp are most at risk of damage and injury when they're in the landing net and the hook is still in their mouths. All it takes is for the hook or the swivel or the lead clip or whatever to get caught in the net, and then for the carp to thrash its head violently. If something gets trapped a short range that's got no give in it, no elasticity, a huge amount of force is going to come onto that hook load and cause terrible damage. The other classic is if you leave the rig in the carp's mouth and then you go to lift it out of the water, either directly in the net or in the cradle. By leaving that hook in during this process, the risk of damage is just increased quite significantly. With barbless hooks, it's really so easy to eliminate this problem completely. All I do is immediately after I've caught a carp, I put the rod down, I secure the landing net, I bend down and I unhook that carp directly. It's the very, very first thing I do. I have nothing else to prepare or organise. All I have to do is unhook that carp. Once the carp is unhooked, I can take my time, get my camera gear sorted, get my scales sorted, get my antiseptic ready. Now, yes, you can unhook a micro-barbed hook from a carp in the landing net, but it's so much easier to do with a barbless hook. It really is. By making the unhooking of the carp your first job, the risk of damage in the net goes away completely. It's gone. The other time when a carp can suffer from mouth damage is if it becomes tethered. If your line breaks and a carp gets itself in a snag and the lead doesn't eject or it gets tangled up in some other way, then you've got a tethered carp, and that's a terrible thing to contemplate. If you use a barbless hook, the chance of that carp being able to unhook himself either before he even gets to the snag to unhook the rig from himself, or while he's in the snag unhooking it, the chance of further damage has been reduced significantly, because it's so much easier for him to flick out a barbless hook than it is a micro-barbed hook. When we drain, I go around all of the margins, all of the structures, and I inspect these areas for snags. Prior to our switch to barbless, it was common enough for me to find, a number of rigs. I think one year I found 10 rigs round the bridge alone, and they were all micro-barbed hooks, and the carp had obviously used the bridge structure to unhook themselves. So 10 rigs, that's a lot of rigs. After a couple of years of switching to barbless, the next time we did the drain down, I found one rig, just one rig, and that was an old micro barbed hook that obviously someone had decided to, you know, fish with when they shouldn't have done. That's a massive difference to go from 10 rigs to one. So what's happening here, I believe, is that the carp are actually able to shed the rig because it's barbless even before they get to the snag. I understand that for many of you, a switch to barbless for 100% of your carp fishing is probably too big a leap. At least if you are fishing a weedy venue or a venue with plenty of snags in there, then a switch to barbless, it's not going to harm your results at all. It's going to make it easier and safer to fish with, and it's going to be better for the carp whether you catch them or whether you lose them. I know that some anglers prefer to use a crushed barb. The argument for that is that a crushed barb is safer than a micro barbed hook, but that little crushed barb will kind of lodge in the carp's mouth and stop the barbless hook moving around. Well, as I've already explained, barbless hooks don't move around. I'm not a big fan of the crushed barbed option because you still need extra force for that hook to penetrate beyond where the crush has happened. You've got an increase in diameter. If you fish with a barbless hook, once it's gone up to the wire gauge, then it goes all the way up to the bend, so you get full penetration, maximum hook hold. Also, whenever you put a micro barb on a hook, you actually weaken the point of the hook. At the end of the day, it's a cut into the metal, and this reduces the section. It's also a stress concentration factor. This means that whatever size of hook you're using, you're going to have to use a slightly thicker gauge with a micro barbed pattern, because there's going to be a risk that the hook point can fail. If you use a barbless pattern, you can use a thinner gauge because it's stronger, because there's no weak point on the point. Thinner hooks are sharper hooks, and sharper hooks will catch you more carp. I've made another change to the hooks I use as well. I've gone from a size 4 down to a size 6, and in some circumstances I can even get away with a size 8, even for very big carp. Watch this video to find out why.